Hello, and welcome back to the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. This is Penny Sansevieri with my ever awesome co-host, Amy Cornell. And so this show was born again out of, and I'm going to have to let Amy speak to sort of the genesis of the show idea, but this is really something that we see a lot. And I think that it's worth addressing because some new statistics have come out in terms of author sales and versus indie published authors. And Amy, do you want to talk a little bit more about where the kind of the origin story of this podcast?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's always been a thing, but I think just we never know why certain concerns come up with authors, but they definitely come in waves, I think, Penny. Haven't you noticed that we'll
Yes.
see trends in what authors are focused on, whether it's a certain sales aspect or a certain promotional strategy? Like, everybody was asking about TikTok for a while, and then that kind of faded out. So we definitely get authors that seem to be focused on things in waves. And that's a lot of times where the ideas for these shows come in. And we've had a handful of authors lately really concerned about the pace of their sales. And typically this is for newer books. So books that have not been on the market very long, but clearly a lot of authors are expecting more in terms of sales and immediate sales validation than what's often realistic. And you and I both recognize how discouraging it can be, when you think, okay, my sales are going to be X by month 1 and X by month 2. And when that doesn't happen, and it's so easy for authors to get derailed and again, discouraged in terms of what should be happening. And then they start playing the comparison game. And then it's just a big dumpster fire of negative feelings about what's going on. And so with that, you and I chatted, it's like, maybe we should talk about this and just kind of do a reminder to everybody about what expectations are realistic and which ones kind of aren't. So you know that you're still on track. You may not meet those goals, but that doesn't mean you're not on track and for what's normal in the industry. Right. I think that's the important thing to remember, that it's not about failure. It's about what's realistic and what's typical, and just keeping those kind of things in mind as well.
Good. Yeah. So do you want to dig into the Authors Guild stuff?
Yeah. So this was very cool. I'm not a huge stats person, but I do like to look them up every once in a while, mostly because then it's a little more surprising. And I love finding surprising statistics about the industry. And so Authors Guild released a survey. It included over 5,600 published authors, both traditionally published and indie authors. And this is from 2022, so not very long ago. Their median gross pre-tax income just from their books was $2,000.
Wow.
So this is definitely, again, like, we're not trying to get real dark here, but we're talking about the realities of the industry. Okay. So $2,000 was their medium gross pre-tax income from their books alone. The top 10% of established authors, and let me tell you, established, for the sake of, the stats that we'll be sharing, they use that as 5 or more years of publishing experience. So this is not brand new authors. Okay. So the top 10% of established authors who participated in this survey had a median book income of $275,000 just last year.
Wow.
Yeah. But on the flip side, the bottom 50% had a median book income of $1,300. So people are probably like, oh my God, my brain's exploding. And I get it. But what we're trying to say here too is that the range is huge. It is huge. And we've talked about that a lot, Penny, especially with clients and things like that, comparing yourself to what realistically is the top 10% or even 1%, of published authors is just not a great way to set bars, your own personal, goalposts, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is, I am not, so first off, these numbers don't really surprise me, but I think that with regards to self-published or indie published, whatever you call it, that the earnings tend to work more in their favor is also not surprising because, well, for the first reason is that Um, a lot of times when an author gets a traditional publisher, and it's a great coup, and congratulations if you did, there is a misalignment of expectations. And it's not necessarily anybody's fault unless the publisher doesn't live up to what they promised to do. But many times assumptions are made. For example, oh my gosh, I have a traditional publisher, I don't have to market my book. So the book launch day hits and they're prepared with absolutely nothing, right? Or in the case of where the publisher did not live up to their, to their promises, we worked with an author who had a really, really, really good book, was traditionally published, and the publisher said, "Oh, we're going to do all these things." And the publisher was like, when the book published, the publisher was like, "Yeah, we're not going to do all these things," because for whatever reason they gave her. So traditional publishing can be complex in that way, in that, because we actually have, I talked to an author, and you and I have talked about them a couple of weeks ago, and they're with a traditional publisher and their book is out, and the publisher's like, "Okay, good luck." Right. And they, and they get to this publishing process and they're just like, "Oh my gosh." So where self-publishers have the advantage is that going into this that you have to do all of this yourself. I mean, listen, you may not like it, because we talked to a lot of authors who are like, "Oh, I just want to write books. I don't want to market my books." I get it, but you have so much more control over everything.
Mm-hmm.
That these numbers don't necessarily surprise me. And there's another one that I know you research and that are in the show notes. So established, as you pointed out, 5 years plus of publishing experience, full-time self-published authors more than doubled their book income in 2022 compared to 2018, while full-time traditionally published authors only saw an 11% increase. So
that's crazy.
Which is crazy. What this number tells us is that not only that self-publishing rocks, but that as you publish books, as you continue to put titles out there, not necessarily even in a series. I mean, it could just be, that you like to write, in the historical fiction genre or whatever. But as you continue to put books out there, obviously your knowledge increases, your fan base increases, your reach increases,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's, I don't find these numbers to be, they're surprising in a way, and in another way, they're really not. But I think that figuring out what helps. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, "Okay, I want those numbers. What can I do with my independently published book?" And I think the very, very first step, obviously, I mean, we have shows that talk about great covers, like we get it. At the end of the day, you have to remember that your book sells your book, right? So no amount of running ads, no amount of doing all the things can get you to these numbers. You have to put out a good book. So we're not going to spend any time on that, but it's just worth kind of inserting here at the beginning. But making sure that you are making it easy for people to buy. So that means two things. Having different book formats, right? So Kindle, print, audio, and now, which we'll reference a little bit, Amazon's made it even easier to do audiobooks. Whatever your feeling is on that, right? I mean, it's now a competitor in the audiobook market. And then making sure that your books are priced competitively. And this is, I cannot emphasize to you how important this is. Now, if you're with a traditional publisher or a university press or, a trade publisher, whatever, all of this is going to be out of your control. And this is potentially one big reason why independently published authors do so well, because they can put out large print, they can put out, audio, Kindle, whatever, and they can pick the prices that they know will work for their market, which I think is extremely key and often overlooked by authors.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, Penny. The pricing is a huge factor, and we deal with that with our clients also,
all the time. Yeah.
All the time. And it's one of those like hard to have conversations because you're like, I don't want to tell you something you probably don't want to hear. but the reality is, we're here to educate too. And that's part of this, the tough realities. Another big factor, reviews, like a lot of them. The positive word of mouth carries so much weight. And that's another thing too that we see happen with a lot of authors who, their book's been out for a month or 6 weeks or even a couple months, Penny, and they're disappointed with their sales to date. But, you go to their retail page and they might have a handful of reviews. And what's also, I think, that became a huge factor that shoppers are getting savvy to is the difference between ratings and reviews.
Yeah.
You'll see a book, it'll be like, oh, it has 80 ratings and, 80 ratings and reviews, and you go down and they may only have a handful of actual written reviews with a real opinion.
Yeah.
And shoppers are savvy enough to know that's not the same thing, Yeah. So anyway, those reviews really do matter. So if you're upset about sales and you really don't have a lot of reviews yet, we're talking, 50 or more is on the low end,
Yeah.
If you look at top selling books, these books have a lot of reviews. And this is not to drag you down, but it's, again, setting expectations and telling you where you should be spending your marketing time, focusing on getting those purchases to convert to reviews as much as possible. Another huge factor is your online real estate.
Yes.
We kind of use that as a catch-all term to mean all the things that people can find about you and your book online when they're looking for a new book to read. So coverage from people who are already influencing your potential buyers, depending on where you write in and your platform and your topic and all that thing. That could be everything from actual big media, like national media, to genre influencers, all incredibly important depending on your specific book market. And then, we've done a lot of shows on local, so y'all should definitely look for those, but local exposure and promotional efforts absolutely matter. We've talked about how much those can stimulate sales in between releases, way more than you could ever expect. So that's a huge factor in this. And, if you don't have all these things going for you, like I said, this is not supposed to be a big downer show. It just is a reminder that there are things that might be missing in your marketing plan. There's still things that you could be doing. And I think, honestly, that is a light at the end of the tunnel, Penny. It'd be worse to sit here and go, I'm not selling any books, but I'm already doing all of these things perfectly.
Right.
It's like, but it takes time. Consistency absolutely matters. And, sales is a numbers game. It sounds like a cliche to say that, but it really is. So you have to be constantly getting in front of more of the right people to get more sales. You can't bank on those couple hundred people you got in front of, when you did a lot of work the first week your book came out, to show up eventually and buy your books.
Right.
You have to constantly be moving, and the train does not stop.
Right. Exactly. And I think that you have to focus on the work, not necessarily the results. So people ask me all the time, how have you been in business for 23 years? And, first off, running your own business is not, as Amy well knows, is not for the faint of heart. But the real secret to any kind of success in publishing is consistency, right? So anything that I've done for my books or for my business has been consistent. And that's really where you have to focus on. And we have actually a show on this too, focusing on micro goals and getting, as opposed to saying, okay, I really want a show on Netflix, focus on the, 1,000 micro goals that you need to hit before that would even be a consideration. And I'm not necessarily saying, don't shoot for the moon. This is, again, Amy is very cautious about mentioning this is not a buzzkill show. But I think that whatever you do with consistency will pay off in the end, truthfully. And when I see authors that get discouraged about results, and we've seen this over the years, we've seen, I had an author, and I've cited this on a show before. So if you're a regular listener, I apologize for the duplication, but there was an author, thriller author that I worked with years ago, and he consistently So he got picked up by a traditional publisher and they did the marketing for him. So we worked with him with his first book, maybe his first two. It's been a while, but he would consistently get discouraged about the results. And that was the only thing that he focused on. And brilliant, brilliant, brilliant author. But the books ended up not doing anything and he never wrote again just because the results and the lack of what he believed was supposed to happen drove more disappointment than he could weather, which is really a shame because sometimes you have a good book and it just takes a while. And I think that's part of the reason too, Amy, why this survey was based on quote unquote established authors, because right out of the gate, and again, we're not trying to be discouraging, but it's harder. And I say this to authors all the time. Every time you publish a book, the process becomes easier, both because you have more knowledge, but also because your first book, your second book sells your first, your third sells your second and your first, and so on. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you circled back to that established authors aspect as well, because it's true what you said. And we tell people that all the time it's like, okay. And honestly, when authors come to us, Penny, that have a first book in a series, we are very straightforward. When is the next one coming out? Do you have a plan for that? Because that is also a part of what we need to know in order to both make recommendations, but also to help them with their expectations.
Yeah.
For where this is going. Okay, you're going to invest in marketing now, based on whether or not you have a publishing plan for the next release. It changes things. It absolutely does.
Yeah.
That next book makes a huge difference. And I also should I go through some examples? I love finding these things because I am still, even though I've been doing this for a long time with you, it still amazes me how many authors, how long it took them to really see real success. And these are people we all know by name, a lot of us at least. And it's such a great reminder. So I'm just going to go through some of these because, again, I find this fascinating. And again, I think hopefully for anybody listening, it's also a good reminder that, after your book's been out a couple months, that's no way to gauge your long-term success as an author,
Yeah.
So here we go. James Redfield sold The Celestine Prophecy out of the trunk of his car, which I find so old school and amazing.
I know it.
But the idea that, talk about blood, sweat, and tears, Penny, that's right up there. Okay, so Lisa Genova, who wrote Still Alice, she actually wrote that in 2007, couldn't get it picked up by anyone. So she self-published. So she was definitely ahead of the curve, I think, in that regard. And 2 years later, it was picked up by Simon & Schuster and hit the New York Times bestseller list. And in case anybody doesn't remember, Julianne Moore was also in the movie release. And that came out in 2015.
Yes.
So many years after she published, it then turned into a movie. So talk about playing the long game,
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody listening has heard of Your Erroneous Zones. Really popular now. It's actually one of the top-selling nonfiction books of all time, and this is to your point, Penny, about sometimes publishers presenting challenges that you end up not realizing are a problem until they are. The publisher refused to do any marketing. So the author actually ordered the entire stock. It was like 5,000 books of the initial print run. And again, started selling them on the road and doing personal appearances and things like that just to get the book out there.
That's amazing.
Again, I know, right? I love that. He's like, hold my beer. I'm buying all my books back and I'm going to sell this shit.
That's so fabulous. Yeah.
I know. I thought isn't that cool?
Yeah. And Wayne Dyer has just gone on. Obviously now he's deceased, but he went on to do tremendous book sales. You could even say, so Louise Hay's publishing company, which is actually based in San Diego, he's very much a pivotal author that helped to build that company, Hay House.
Amazing.
That's amazing.
And then everybody knows Stephen King. I didn't actually realize this, and I'm a huge fan of his horror specifically, but he was publishing short stories for years and not really getting any attention for it. I didn't realize he was doing that. And he actually threw Carrie, which was his first actual published book, in the trash. And the only reason it survived is because his wife pulled it out of the trash and encouraged him to keep working on it. So mind blown with that one. John Grisham, A Time to Kill, was rejected 28 times. I mean, that number is staggering.
Yeah.
Especially, obviously, we all know when he went on to do Twilight. Love it, hate it. It was still a major phenomenon. Rejected 14 times. Harry Potter rejected 10 times. And I love this. I wanted to pull one non-book example that would just be that everybody would know about. But Phil Knight was actually selling Nike shoes at track meets because he couldn't get any like sporting goods stores, because that's what you needed to do back then. He couldn't get them to stock his shoes. So somebody else who threw their stuff in their car and was like, I'm going to do this, and just put in the work. And it absolutely paid off,
Yeah, that's I love that. I love stories like this. And I love watching like documentaries on people who just did,
yes,
who like did the impossible. I mean, it's so inspiring. I think that the final little piece is the audiobook format, which is surprisingly dramatically underpublished. So I'm reading the statistic, 55% of traditional and 64% of self-published authors have none of their books in audio format. Part of that is because has been so cost prohibitive. But now with KDP or Amazon's virtual voice, I mean, that's going to, again, we did a whole show on that. That's going to definitely level the playing field, because I mean, audiobooks, an audiobook, I think I've done an audiobook before for a client a bunch of years ago, and it was $3,500 or $4,000. So that they're not inexpensive endeavors.
No, and based on our statistics earlier, that would take an average of 2 or 3 years just to make that back alone. So
right, exactly.
I'm not really a math person, but all of a sudden I am after this show.
Right.
As long as nobody's checking my work. And now, can I say, for anybody that's, I don't want to say made it this far, because hopefully this was all riveting, Hopefully
nobody gave up.
Right. But we have a special treat for those of you that have lasted this long and made it to the end of the show. We wanted to do something fun that we're going to try to do a little more often now, is some insider publishing stories and tidbits from behind the curtain, because I just love these. And honestly, for as long as Penny and I have been working together, there are still stories that I haven't heard. So I'm excited for this too. I think I'm going to be surprised as much as y'all are sometimes. So I'm going to hand it back to Penny, and she's going to share a fun little, again, behind the scenes of publishing nugget with us.
So this is so funny, because Amy and I were texting about something, and she's like, you need to start sharing these stories on the podcast, because, after 23 years, you do get a lot of stories. Some of the ones that we're going to be sharing over the course of the shows, we probably won't do it with every show, but they're going to have to be completely anonymous, just because, I'd like to stay in business. Because some of them are pretty bad. But when this podcast hits, obviously OJ Simpson will have been dead for a week. And I know I sent her a text this morning, like, OJ Simpson's died. She's like, oh, about time. Or whatever you said in the text. I forget now what it was. But
I blew a couple karma points on that comment, but it was worth it.
I know. I know it. But we actually worked so this was actually before Amy's time. So we worked with so OJ Simpson, for those of you who don't know this backstory, OJ Simpson wrote a book with a ghostwriter called If I Did It. And the publisher at that time, this was a big scandal in publishing. So the publisher who purchased the book got fired for purchasing the book, because everybody was outraged, like, oh my gosh, why are you letting OJ Simpson write a book? So anyway, so the publisher gets fired, the book gets canned. Then the Goldmans went after OJ in the civil trial, and they won. And part of it, like I want to say they got like a measly $30,000. I mean, it was not, how much is the price of a life, right? I mean, it was just crazy. But so they also won the book back. The book, they found a publisher for the book. The publisher is the one that hired us. And the publisher then renamed it from If I Did It to I Did It. And I went up to LA to have this big meeting, and the Goldmans were there, although I didn't really work so directly with them. I met them a few times. And then a whole bunch of people like around the table from the publishing house, all this other stuff. And there was one person who was there who was originally involved with the process of when the book was originally written, and said to all of us that OJ at some point during conversation about the book and the creation of the book said, I bet you're wondering if I did it. And the person just kind of looked at him, because who wants to say, yeah, tell me, damn it. Did you know what I mean?
Right.
Right. And, OJ took a beat and leaned across the table and said, I effing killed them both, and nobody can do anything to me ever again because of double jeopardy. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the second part to this story is, so the book is now published for the Goldmans have their name on it. They do a ton of interviews, and Mom was visiting, and we were in Vegas because my mother used to love to go to Vegas. So we were in Vegas, and we're walking down the strip, and we see all these police cars just flying down the strip. And I'm like, what is going on? Right. Because, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen in Vegas. And that was the day, actually, the Goldmans were on Oprah that day. And OJ could not stand, because Fred Goldman, through the publisher, I heard this, Fred Goldman said this, Fred Goldman hated OJ Simpson hated whenever the Goldmans got any kind of news attention. So he would always do something stupid. And in this case, he decided to steal back his shit from some guy to get himself in the nuts, how he wound up getting arrested. But those cop cars that were flying by and all the whatever vehicles that were going, I think there was actually SWAT, like there was everything, right? We're flying down the Vegas Strip. That was for OJ Simpson. And it was the same day that the Oprah interview aired, because he just couldn't stand that the Goldmans were getting attention. It was it's so crazy. So, so that's
chilling.
Yeah, it's kind of, and then he wound up in prison. He was supposed to get 33 years, only got 9, which was kind of a bummer.
I know that went by way too fast.
It did. It went by way too fast, but it's kind of interesting. It's sort of like Al Capone got, put in prison for tax evasion. Of course, I guess he died in prison, but OJ Simpson gets put in prison for stealing his own trophies. I'm sorry, I don't mean to find that, but it was such a ridiculous, like everybody was kind of like, dude, you literally, like, you are the dumbest person on the planet. Right. Anyway, but yeah, so
absolutely.
That was, yeah. So we've seen a lot. So we'll tell more interesting stories, as time, and as I said, most of them will be cloaked in secrecy, just because, sometimes we have to change the names to protect the very guilty. But yeah, all right. It's been a pleasure. And by the way, thank you so much to those of you who just reviewed the podcast. We love reviews. We see you. I'm always checking for reviews. I just texted Amy another one this morning. I'm like, yay, look at us go. But thank you so much for reviews, and we love show ideas. So send us those as well. And our contact information is in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.